Have you ever felt frustrated trying to paint mountainscapes? If you get lost in all the details, the highlights, the shadows, and then you add snow on top, it gets complicated quickly. Or maybe you just struggle to make your mountains look 3D and they look flat and lifeless. If this is you, you're not alone. You might know me from my short tutorials, but if not, my name is Jake, and I've been able to go from a beginner artist to now teaching my techniques and growing an online community of landscape painters where I help hundreds improve. So today we're going to paint this photo submitted by Kiki. I'll take you through my process for painting commissions, and I'll give you 4 actionable steps to improve your mountainscapes. So the first thing I do each week is go through my list of requests to find a photo I really resonate with. And this week I came across this photo submitted by Kiki, and I think it would make a beautiful painting. So I reached out to Kiki just to make sure she was still able to pay, and we agreed on a price and a canvas size. So I got started with step 1 of the painting, which is just to decide on a composition. I think the composition of the photo already works well, so I just cropped it to take out what I didn't want to keep, and I made sure that my horizon line was lower because the focus of my painting is mountains, so you'll want a lower horizon to allow your mountains to take up more space on the canvas. The purpose of changing the composition of your photo is to create a more dynamic and eye-catching painting, and to have a focal point or an area of interest that your painting's about, so your painting will hold your viewers' attention better. But if you're confused on exactly what makes a good composition, I go into detail on this in my free community. So I also made sure that my trees and other elements didn't extend over the mountains. I'm keeping the trees short just like in the photo. So I'm adding some darker values just by mixing my burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I think it's important to map out values because it establishes depth. Usually your foreground will have darker and lighter values than your background. In this painting, the foreground is just much darker than the background. Now I'm using some burnt sienna mixed with water to tone my canvas because I prefer to get rid of the bright white canvas. Once you finish this step, you now have a map of the painting that will guide the rest of your process. So now we need to block in the colors so that we have a base where we can add details on top. I'm still using acrylics during this stage, and the goal is just to match the colors and the values. But from talking to hundreds of followers and people in the community, I've noticed that a common problem with landscape artists is not being able to match the colors correctly. So I created a free course on how to match any color, but one of the biggest takeaways is this 3-step process. You start by matching the hue, which is what the color is called, like yellow, blue, or purple. Then you try to match the saturation, which is how intense or how neutral the color is. Then step 3 is you match the value, which is how dark or light the color is. So if you follow these 3 steps, you'll pretty much be able to match any color. I think it's so important that you have a set process that you follow for each painting, because this will help you get consistent results so that people can trust you, that if they commission you, they'll know exactly what they're getting. You can copy my exact process, which I'm walking you through in this video, and I made a list of all the steps, and I put that in the description of this video, along with the color palette that I use. Okay, so now once you've blocked in the painting, you can start detailing. So I switched over to oils because I find them easier to detail with, and they look a little bit more professional. I filled in the sky, and now it's time for the mountains. My first tip is to make your mountains not only extend to the left and right, but they also should extend towards the viewer. So to do this, you can just draw a line that goes down from a peak in the mountains, and then you can add your highlights and your shadows. And you can repeat this pattern at any peak in the mountains. This is just an easy way to design and think about your mountains, and I learned this from Bob Ross. So my tip number 2 is that with complex details like this, you'll want to slow down and just add single colors in different areas of your mountain first, then go back with lighter and darker values to add details on top of those areas. And just find this an easy way to detail mountains like this. My third tip is to study your reference and find patterns in the mountains that you're painting. So for example, I noticed that the snow tends to build up in areas between the peaks in the mountain. I also noticed that there's this pattern with ruts forming in the mountain from erosion, where I'm just painting those with some darker values with lines going down and some lighter values around the edges. So it's really important to study your photo and figure out these patterns. My 4th tip is to mix the right colors. So in this case, I mixed colors that are more blue and white than the mountains closer. This adds depth, and it's called atmospheric perspective, where things further away get closer to the hue of the atmosphere. And mixing these mountain colors was actually easier than you'd think. I just used ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and titanium white, following my 3-step process. And I just changed the proportion of these 3 colors for different areas. For example, the snow is going to have more white, the shadows are going to have more ultramarine blue, and that highlight on top is going to have more burnt sienna and a touch of cadmium yellow. So moving on to the foreground of this painting, it's pretty straightforward. I added some details in the trees. For this, I recommend that you use a round brush. I think it's the best type of brush for painting distant pine trees. So this painting is almost finished. I believe that learning and applying fundamental landscape painting concepts is what is really going to change your painting. And there are many ways to learn this, but I truly believe that the best way is through learning from one-on-one coaching with somebody who knows more than you about painting. And so that's how I teach people now. That's just how I was able to learn. So yeah, make sure to send me any of your photos that you want me to paint in the next video, and join the landscape painters group if you want to learn more about landscape painting. So yeah, all of that is going to be in the description of this video. Let me know if this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.